I'm going to start the weathering process by using a sponge to add on a lighter green. This just sort of adds a light texturing to the paint, makes it a bit more inconsistent and a bit more natural looking. In truth, this is optional. I'm doing it because I want to do these models up to more of a display standard, but most of the time I don't bother adding this layer in. A lot of it will end up getting hidden when we do the weathering at later stages. But for now, it does add a little bit more visual interest to the green and helps break up that solid color a little bit. I focus my attention to areas that would wear more, so that tends to be along corners and edges. Next, I repeat the process that I just did with the light green, but this time I'm using Vallejo Hull Red. The reason why I'm using this brownish red color is that it really gives a good look for the primer that would chip down to after the paint receives some damage. But additionally, a reddish brown will contrast with green because red is opposite green on the color wheel, so that's going to make it show up the best. If I was painting with a different color like red or like blue or something, I would use a different color for the undercoat here. Now this can be done either with a green first and then you fill in with brown, or you can do it with brown first and then you outline with green. I've had better luck using the brown first and then outlining to get the highlight, but there are many people who do it the other way around as well. Again, like with the light green, I'm focusing primarily on edges and corners that will receive more wear. It's okay if it doubles up on top of the light green spots. That's fine. We want to get that mix, and that's what gives it the visual interest that we want. The order that we do all of this weathering is very important. So I'm doing the chipping now after we've done all of the decals so that I can chip through the decals. It's also done before I do any of the metallics on the kit as well, because I want to be able to not worry about being messy here. So if I get it on areas that will later be metallic, that's fine. I'll just paint right over it with the metallics. Because the bikes are a vehicle and they're going to be moving around fast, most of the damage and weathering is going to come from the front end. So I spend a lot of time focusing on really doing the very front parts of the armor, as opposed to focusing on the back, because I really want to show as it's driving through things, it's taking more damage, more wear and tear. Whenever I stop getting as much paint off the sponge as I want, I just dip it back into my pool, and then I have to make sure that I get most of the paint back off of it. It's very much like dry brushing, so if there's too much paint on the sponge, it's going to fill in all of the details, and we don't want that. So we have to make sure it's fairly dry, and that's going to allow it just to stamp the texture of the sponge with all of the little openings and intricacies without it all filling in on me. As I mentioned before, corners and edges tend to receive the most damage, so wherever there's a corner I put a little dab of paint, and that's going to show that the paint's been worn off there. While the sponge is awesome for creating chips all over the model, if I want to add scratches, it takes a little bit more of a delicate hand. For that, I use a fine-tipped brush, use it in my paint, I just water it down, and I can add scratches in both the green and the brown, just to add even more detail to it. Because when you take damage, it's not just chipping that occurs, but things scratch as it brushes up against a branch or something like that. With that in mind, I'm really careful to make sure that all of the scratches pretty much all go with the direction of travel, so they're all moving from the front to the back of the model. If it was on a model that's just on foot, then that'd be a lot more random. But with a bike, I want to really create a sense of movement, a sense of speed, so making all the weathering focused on the front towards the back really helps to create that sense of movement in the piece. Having created a bunch of scratches with the light green now, which are just sort of surface scratches that didn't quite break through the paint entirely, I'm going over now and adding some with the same hull brown used before to create the chipping. To do this, sometimes I just do independent scratches, and sometimes I take the chips and I sort of extend a thin strip off of the chip where it's already started with a bigger piece and then sort of graduates into a scratch. When I'm happy with all the weathering that I've done, it's time to go back now and start adding in all the silver sections. I like to keep it pretty simple on my bikes, especially with Raptors, who are supposed to be very pragmatic. So I just make a lot of things a dark silver, and then I cover it with a wash in order to matte it and to help bring out the details. And then I'll go back and I'll edge highlight it a little bit just to give it a little bit of interest. But for the most part, I'm quite happy with just a dark metallic silver for all of the metal parts. Sometimes it takes 2 coats to get good coverage, but I just go over all of the metal. Once the silver's all dry, I now go on to it with the non-oil wash from Games Workshop. Most of the paints I use are Scale 75 or Vallejo, but for washes, I still really like GW's ones. The matte finish that it adds to the effect here. It's not always what you want, especially with metallics, but with the Raptors, as I mentioned, they're very pragmatic, so they wouldn't want things to be too shiny, but sometimes you just want to have the metallic to help break everything up. It's not always about realism. I mean, if it were, we'd make a lot of this stuff matte black or matte green, but it would be visually really boring without enough color separation. So the silver adds color separation, makes it interesting to look at, and then I just tone it down and I help bring out the details by using the black wash. Alright, this is where we're going to end part 2 of the video on how I painted my Raptors Outriders. If you like the video, please subscribe. If you have any feedback for me on how I can make my videos better or content you'd like to see, please leave a comment. I'm going to try and get a bit more regular postings up now, and your feedback's really appreciated.